What's going on, Workforce? Brian and Chris here, and today we're talking about bots, hacks, and cheating your way through Final Fantasy XIV. We got a couple discussion posts on Reddit, but first, actually, I want to highlight a really great video. If you guys have not seen from Misshapen Chair yet, I downloaded Hackbot and now I beat the whole game. I just want to highlight this for you guys. If you have not seen this video in your feed, I'll try to include a link in the description of this video. We are not going to be covering this video in this, but some of the discussion might end up coming up. So if you want to, maybe go check out that video and maybe come back for a discussion.
Watch the full thing.
All
5 minutes and 2 seconds.
Gotta stay for that last two. It's very, very critical and important. So hopefully you guys ultimately enjoy that. Now, at its core, we've got a couple of like little threads here going on Final Fantasy XIV's discussion subreddit, and essentially this one kicks off with apparently some Chinese programmers are developing endgame content bots in Final Fantasy XIV now, and they reference a YouTuber and content creator, which essentially is GD Investigator, basically kind of covering it. Now, what's interesting about that is that one of the things that I thought we'd kind of bring up as a part of this is that a couple of days last week, they apparently kind of closed their account overall. And what we've seen, obviously, if anybody's not new to the Final Fantasy XIV community, you'll know that typically there is definitely a group of Final Fantasy XIV people who will go out of their way to make you aware of them. I guess that's probably going to be the best and politest way I could say it, but it looks like a couple days ago they turned back on their account and they're back. Now, all in all, I haven't seen their content, but I was aware of this idea, this hacking, this botting, and obviously Misshapen Chair kind of then finishing it off, kind of putting a little bow on top of it with a more satirical video approach. But I thought we'd kind of talk about this because this kind of builds up on the add-on and hacks that we've seen kind of persistently add to the game itself, and without any proper form of, I guess, cheating detection. It's kind of falls into Yoshi-P's, like, just don't talk about it, don't show it off in game. Chris, where do you stand in this, and do you feel like this underscores people's achievements? Do you think this is just going to be a temporary thing, or are we as the Final Fantasy XIV community going to have to kind of really deal with a lot of this going forward?
As somebody that enjoys viewing the world first race, my bias naturally tends towards I appreciate the spectator aspect of Ultimates. Never cleared an Ultimate. That is what I like most about Ultimates, is I like watching the race, which means I struggle to be as attached to the teams that do not do it publicly, because the part that I like is watching them, not knowing that, like, somewhere ephemerally that somebody cleared the content. There are people that get that joy out of that, and they love talking to those people, and they love theorizing with those people on Discords. I like the act of watching them fail and fail and fail and then succeed. I find that really rewarding. I love being there when people are getting their first P4S clears. I've loved watching Pyro get his clears. I've loved watching Sebi get his clears. Like, I enjoy watching people get clears, especially these public personalities that can communicate outwardly all the things that, like, I think other people are probably experiencing, but when you watch a video of them, they just kind of, like me, like, I just go, I just smile. Like, I like that they're so expressive. Like, Sebi was like, yeah, and like it's like, that's what you're feeling, but like the video doesn't look like that. And so, like, I appreciate that they are showing the emotion that, like, you like, I wish I could communicate that level of excitement when I get a clear for the first time. So that's where my bias comes from. From a viewer perspective, I just want everybody to be playing on the same rules. I personally do not care if there were steroids in professional sports, but as long as they are against the rules, then I think everybody should follow those rules. And so I just think that, like, whatever the rules are, the world first race within Final Fantasy XIV is fan run, has little to no involvement from the devs, and not only should stay that way, but World of Warcraft's Yoshi-P, Ian Hazacostas, has come out and publicly said, you do not want developers involved in an event like this. And so if the WoW side doesn't have official support for their world first race, why in the world would Final Fantasy get official support for their world first race? That's where I come from on this. So it's literally like, I don't care. I don't. But, like, call it what it is. Like, if somebody says their clear is blind, then it should be blind. that's my thought. I really don't care about add-ons. I don't think they're, me personally, but because they are against TOS, when somebody broadcasts them, if you get popped, you get popped. Like, I don't know if, are you expecting sympathy? Like the rules were right there on the sign on the side of the pool. It said don't run. Do I think it'd be more fun if we could run by the pool? Yeah, absolutely. But like they said don't run, and you're like, oh, that guy that's job it is to enforce the rules is saying I have to follow the rules. Yeah, that's his job.
When it comes down to it, like a couple of different weird hot takes that I've seen is that, okay, no add-ons. I'm all board for that. I was actually impressed by what some of the add-ons did that I was like just completely unaware of. I was like, oh, that's actually pretty cool. And then I go, oh, that'd be nice if the devs went and said, hey, let's go ahead and add that to the game, because that ends up being something that people want or that they like. And I was like, oh yeah, I can totally get on board for that. But I don't have the context of what these add-ons were doing, so I don't know necessarily, like I can't be going into that direction. So it's just kind of like, yeah, like I wish that process started earlier, but beyond the add-on issue, that obviously sprung to life kind of 2 weeks ago when all of a sudden enforcement just, because like your example works fine if that guy was always doing it, like, you know, hey, welcome to Final, like if like in our guides and stuff, like, hey, welcome to Final Fantasy 14, please don't run by the pool, you will get in trouble, like that. Like, you know, you might be coming from another game where running by the pool was perfectly fine. Here it's just don't talk about it. Like, and that's been the announcement, that's been the word, that's been the official statement from the guy in authority. And he's like, just don't talk about it. And then people are like, all right, well, we're just going to talk about it. Like, what's the worst that could happen? And then the answer was nothing happened. And all of a sudden the guy was like, woke up from a nap and was like, all right, we're going to have to enforce this now. So I think essentially that's going to hopefully be important to see having that happen. And Quad, thank you so much for 12 months of support. Happy 1 year for you, Quad. So at its core, when we start to look at it and how it functions, I was like, okay, but there's another side of this. Like, where this actually personally impacts me is that if somebody cheats and gets a win, it doesn't feel like a win. I don't sit here and go like, oh, you did something you didn't. Like, and like if it's just like for like some kind of weird clout, like you're like, oh, look what I got triple legend. No, you didn't. You know, like,
No, you didn't.
you know, okay, so the game says that. It devalues, though, the people who have that same title, because I'm not going to be sitting here going and now researching every character name that I say, oh, they got a special title. Like, who is that person?
Fair.
You know, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to accept it, right? So I think there is a devaluation on people who actually have done that, especially if more and more people kind of go this route, and especially if it's obviously not public. My whole philosophy is that, like, if you're going to cheat, I kind of want to know. Like, I kind of be like, that's a guy, that guy's a, you know, like, all right, that's who he is, right? It was the same advice I gave to my brother in high school. He had a bud who went and told the school, like, one of my brother's secrets that my brother didn't want told. And I sat down and my brain was hurt by this, you know, and I was like, bro, like, all right, here's the thing though. You now know who he is. You now know that actually about him. So don't tell him anything that you don't want everybody to know, but you tell him things that you want everybody to know. Like, you can literally understand who he is. And so you don't, you know, just don't tell him anything you don't want to know. And you tell, if you want the world to know something, that's the guy you tell. And that's like, and go from there. And it really kind of helped him out and changed his life in that regard. Just understanding who somebody is at its core. And so that's the thing. Like, if you're going to be a cheater, like, if I know that about you, like, all right, like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh my gosh, like, Chris has got triple legend. When did that happen? You know, like, oh, no, that didn't happen. That was just some kind of, you know, bot. But that being said, though, where this actually really impacts me, because, and again, I'm not trying to discount anybody's like PvE goals and experience. Just note that that's just not my, you know, the thing that I go after. So
Right.
Awesome. You do. I'm fully supportive of it. But what I'm about to pivot to, don't lose the thread, please. When I see the PvP aspect, which is something I actually care about, and we see all this cheating within PvP, it does frustrate me, because as opposed to that, PvE, I think you're only cheating yourself. In PvP, you're preventing somebody, and PvP in this game is, I feel like we got to nurture it. And I'm glad the devs we just covered yesterday, the patch notes, you know, like we got to nurture it. We got to protect it. We got to be, you know, it's in a way, it's got to be sacred, because what we don't want to have happen is that people are just like, no, like, unless you're cheating, there's no point in going in. And then all of a sudden we're right back. Despite the fact that they've really both built a mode that's great, and that they've also delivered it in a way that I don't have to sit here and wait for hours. And if the cheaters then go in and start kind of doing that, when in the PvP perspective, that's where personally
you're actively taking something away from somebody else at that point, though. So that is like, so we're having two different conversations here. The misshapen share thing is talking about like things like CACPOT. You're talking about like increased buff sizes. You're talking about DPS meters, and you're talking about you are still clearing the content. It's still you. It's not, I have a gather bot and it's like, look, I gathered 1,000 herbs while I was asleep last night. No, you didn't. So like, you're having two different conversations here. So an add-on in PvP that simply just says, hey, like, I just have trouble focusing on my buff timers and I want to isolate this one buff. And so an add-on that takes that one buff and makes it bigger, but you still have to push the button when the timer goes off.
Right.
That doesn't bother me. I don't think that takes anything away. But when you start to say, like, what you're now talking about has shifted from what I was originally, like, we're starting to talk more about the Reddit side of this.
Well, I think they're closely...
Like, there's a bot that's pressing the button for me.
Right. But there's also, in this regards, I think there is still a close relation to that. Now, the thing I will say, and I stand by, is in your case, right? You have a need so that you can actually play the game. The game does not offer you that. The game needs to offer you that. And hopefully we can, as a community, get that feedback to the devs, right? Like the fact that you need to isolate that, I don't like, and then obviously an add-on's handling it, that needs to make sure that that feedback is going into the devs so that they can give the game the option, because either we're for add-ons and we're for breaking terms of service, or we're not. And this gray murky area of not talk about it, I think is essentially like that's something that I now actually have a problem with, because essentially of how abused it is. It's like, you know, like you're talking about kind of like the law of the land. It's like, okay, well, let's change the laws, because essentially what you're going to end up having happen is it's partial kind of enforcement. It's murky. It's the Twitch of that kind of enforcement, where it's like, well, why did that person get hit and that person didn't? And then you end up having what we've seen over the last 2 weeks is this, like, you know, Final Fantasy XIV's terms of service police unit squad that's like, they're like volunteer firefighters or all put together. We're gonna go like, oh, and the problem with that though is that even that like self-policing has an inherent bias to it. So they might say, man, I really like Brian, we're gonna let him slide. No, like, I'm not doing terms of service, but I'm just gonna focus on me. No. Like, either the terms of service matter or they don't. And this is where I think it bleeds right into bots and hacks. Like, if like it just becomes, in my mind, and again, the slippery slope argument isn't like the full on like be all end all in terms of like any kind of argument here, but what we've seen here is that in effect, just don't talk about it. Okay, now more bots, more hacks, games larger. Maybe that's just, you know, maybe all of this is just in correlation. It hasn't maybe grown. It's just the ratio has remained the same. And so it does feel like a little bit larger, but then obviously you get the PvP aspect. You get the like, okay, I'm only using it for this, but it could also then be used for that. And I just think that this is a good opportunity for the devs to kind of look at the needs that the gamers have and have had. You know, what better template, right, than the add-ons that people have already been using, and say, okay, let's go ahead and bring those in, and then everybody benefits. PlayStation players benefit, PC players benefit. Maybe one day we'll have Xbox news as I continue to kick that can down the street. Who knows? If Sony buys them, maybe it's going to be off the table forever. Who knows? But yeah, that's
I would say the only part of the big part of what I disagree with what you just said is that their policy is inconsistent. Twitch's policy came from a lack of an enforcement mechanism and a lack of an incentive to create one. What changed was that the music companies started saying, hey, we're going to take away your ability to make money altogether if you don't create an enforcement mechanism. So they did. It was always against TOS. They were never okay with it. They simply didn't have the means to punish you for it and didn't want to make the means, because it was in their best interest that the most hours of content were created on Twitch as possible. And there was no downside to letting you stream copyrighted material. Back in the early days coming out of Justin TV, people were like streaming sporting events and pay-per-view events. And they do enforce that because they were once again at risk of losing their platform. This is the same thing. So like people say, well, like Yoshi-P is so inconsistent. No, Yoshi-P has said, I don't want to spend resources developing tools to track and punish players. I just want to ask you to follow the rules and spend my time and my effort and my energy making content for this game. And so that is like a police department that says, we want to spend all of our time running community events, focusing only on the most heinous crimes. So to save money, we are going to have no traffic cops in this city. And then people are like, now I can do whatever I want on the roads. That didn't change the traffic laws. So then what happens is you start calling in, because there's people doing 110 mile an hour in a 40. This isn't 41 in a 40. They're street racing publicly. They're putting other people's lives at risk. And so they're doing this on this massively publicly scale. So then the police department goes, all right, I guess we'll dedicate some resources when somebody calls in about these people exceeding the speed limit, and we'll punish those people. We got a call, we'll answer the call, we'll go give them a ticket. So they've been doing that. And then people are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. All of a sudden traffic laws mean traffic laws? They always meant traffic laws. Well, I wish they would make a list of what add-ons are allowed. They did. It's an exhaustive list that will last to the end of time. It's all of them. It's all of them. It's like me listing which Starburst flavors I like. All of them. And you know, by saying all of them, I've protected myself. In the future, when they add 10 new flavors, I don't have to go back and modify my list. It's all of them. I like all of them. I'm protected. I know that I'm good into perpetuity because I trust Starburst to only ever add flavors I like. I know that I'm good. So like, that is their list. And you can disagree with their list. You can be like, yeah, but like I watched Fast and the Furious and should be allowed to drive faster. Like, okay, but you can't. So like, there is a separate debate about whether or not we want add-ons. I'm very pro add-ons. I came from WoW. I'm very pro add-ons, but it is their game. And at the end of the day, while I'm playing their game, I respect their rules. And if I'm going to break their rules, what I'm most frustrated about this is A, people take it as, well, somebody modified their UI. Therefore, that's the same as having a bot play their game for them. No, it's not. Stop equating those two. And B, there is this idea that like you being okay with their rules means that you don't want something different. And like, those are not the same thing. I can walk into somebody's house and they can say, hey, would you mind taking your shoes off? And I take my shoes off. That doesn't mean I'm pro taking my shoes off. Maybe I feel more comfortable with my shoes on. They offer really nice arch support, but like, I can respect somebody's rules when I am in their space, and it doesn't have to suddenly redefine how I feel about the world. And if they're asking me to do something I'm wildly uncomfortable with, maybe that's just a house I don't visit. So like, if there is a game that TOS is just this obnoxious thing, that's unfortunate that you can't play that game over something as simple as TOS, but that is what it is. We live in a great time to be a gamer. So that's where I draw an issue with what you're saying, is that there has been this idea of like, it's an inconsistent enforcement, but I don't think
it's absolutely been inconsistently enforced.
In the same way that
for 20 years it's inconsistently enforced.
2 cops doesn't consistently pull you over for speeding. And now there's this argument of like, well, it'd be better if they just put trackers in all our cars. Is that really what you want? Is that what we're arguing for?
Well, I mean, in terms of how you actually prevent the bots, that's the step that you have to take at that point, because they don't scan your computer with anti-cheat, right? So essentially that's what, if the community's like, you know, like if they're not going to enforce this, if we're going to have more bots, more hacks, more cheating in PvP, at some point you have to say like, well, we tried to do this amicably, you know, in that regards. But yeah, like you feeling that it's inconsistent is looking at like, okay, you looked at it over the course of a day where people weren't doing it. I'm talking about 20 effing years of Square Enix's policy being this, not being enforced. And so when you're sitting here saying like, oh, it wasn't that they were speeding on the road. They've been speeding on the road for the last 20 years. Like, that's where people go. The cops are freaking racing with them. You know, like, oh, and now all of a sudden the cops are like, all right, boom, we got to enforce it. That's exactly what happened. That is an inconsistent policy shift, because it is the fact that the policy's been the policy. Yes, it's illegal to street race, but when you're street racing with the dadgum cops and everybody's like, it's fine. Like, this is the, like, you know, we're just not going to, after this race, we just don't talk about it. Like the Fight Club kind of concept. At some point, like it becomes like this second nature. And that's exactly
Fight Club.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where they're you know making explosives. So if that was a spoiler for you, sorry, movie's not. So
worked a game spoiling movies.
And so the thing is, like, are you looking at the execution of the rule or the intent of the rule? Because where people are saying it's inconsistent is they're looking at the execution. There have been less tickets written for speeding in years past. Therefore, this is a shift in policy because they are now writing more tickets per annum.
Well, and the cops are using the speeding data to inform their job design. And you know, it's like when the cops are like, okay, let's see how fast your car can go, and using people who are speeding.
But they're still doing that.
Yeah.
The post banning this said we're going to be looking at these add-ons on what to implement. So
well,
that
that's good.
Changed.
Right.
So the intent is what I'm looking at, and the intent has not changed. The intent in the 2014 Gamer Escape interview, 2014, this is 8 years ago. You can hear Yoshi-P's sigh in the text.
Yeah.
The don't make me hire traffic cops. Like, I am trying to run a police department that is community focused. I don't want to pull people over for pedantic BS.
Right.
If I don't want to write somebody a ticket for not having their headlights on at night. That's a stupid ticket to get. Just turn your freaking headlights on. But if it comes to that, I will. And that has been his stance over and over and over. So if we have an overwhelming number of people driving at night without their headlights on, exceeding the speed limit ridiculously, I will have to at some point start hiring traffic cops. I don't want to, but I will. Please don't make me. Over and over and over. So then when he hires traffic cops, it's seen as a shift in policy, but it's not a shift in policy.
Yeah, the policy didn't change
You're finally
at all.
making him follow through on something that
and
he's
it's not even his.
tried to put off as long as possible. But the intent, the rules were always there. It's just you finally pushed him past the point that he had to execute. Like, if you tell your kids, if you go to bed on time, I don't want to have to come yell at you. I don't want to have to come yell at you. And then for 2 years, your kids go to bed on time and you never have to yell at them. And then finally one day they just don't go to bed and you yell. The yelling is suddenly new, but the yelling is not a change in policy. Right. It's that they finally pushed past your threshold.
So hopefully you don't think I'm saying the policy changed. I continue to say that it's inconsistent enforcement. This also spans beyond 14 and into 11 and over the last 20 years. So this is something that I don't blame Yoshi-P for. It's literally just like a Square Enix. And I think this is actually applies, like, as kind of a final thought to kind of put a bow on it for me, is that this, I feel, is more that this is, I always kind of felt this is more a Square Enix policy than a Yoshi-P one specifically. Because when we've asked for things like an API, he's like, all right, guys, like, you're going to have to, like, give me very specific things of what you would want to do with it. Because if I take it to them, like he said, I think they were like, they're old school. They're like, there's concern for all of these things, security, you know, and it's like, I have to be very, like, send me the requests and we will see if we can't bring it about. But like, he's like, I feel like a lot of it ends up being that the company's like, no, we're worried about X, Y, and Z, and they're not necessarily like completely modernized in terms of like what players would do or could do with it. Anyway, that's just kind of like I've seen him talk about that.
If you guys want to see the exact response, what Brian is talking about, what he said it would take to get add-ons or an API of any kind, thank you for hitting subscribe here on Work to Game. Scroll back through the feed, because what he's referencing is the Shadowbringers Media Tour interview with Brian and I sitting across the coffee table from Yoshi-P. That was a direct question from us, direct to Yoshi-P in person. Back when we could all do in-person things. That was really cool.
Oh, good times,
and so that is an actual question that Brian and I asked. So, like, you know, we cover a lot of this stuff, but that is one that, like, we directly asked for an API. So, like, I think a lot of people are taking, you know, Brian and I getting into semantic talks about whether or not, like, where the line is within bots. Is there inconsistent execution? Is there inconsistent policy and all this? And we agree on some points and disagree on others, but this is all informed by, like, literal interviews that, like, we've even had the chance to ask the questions. So this has been a long running policy. And that's my final point of frustration on all of this, is that people have acted like this has come out of nowhere. You and I have been playing this game since you've been playing since 1.0. I've been playing since right around the launch of ARR, just after. And we've been covering this game since what, late Heavensward?
Yeah, right. Leading up
publicly, and you've been running podcasts much longer.
But
we've been covering it as work to game as a pair since late Heavensward, and so a lot of our frustration in how we feel and why we feel backed up in these opinions comes from this is not new. So I think the one final thing that Brian can agree with me is that like these people who are viewing this as like it came out of totally left field, this meteor just slapped him upside the face.
It was always like this, like I was like
years.
There's always like this like tension, and there's like guys like y'all keep pushing it, and then essentially what ended up happening is like he kind of was like, oh, my parents are like the rules, like don't throw a party, but then it's like I kept throwing parties, and then the parents were like they never said anything, and then all of a sudden it's like then like wait a minute, I got caught or something. But before we wrap up, Patrick Bates Music, thank you so much for 2 months with your Prime sub. Really appreciate the support, saying woo in chat. Chris, why don't you take us out of this video? This is a good one.
Guys, I know it's a heated topic. I know we all feel what we feel. Thankfully, none of our opinions truly matter on their own because Yoshi-P will be making the final call with his team, but they do listen to us as a whole. So make your voices heard anytime, especially when we see things like the Zeppla and Xenos video where they're asking the devs. These are the things that I think people want in the absence of add-ons. And so anytime there's a chance to make your voices heard, especially in a collective group, while a YouTuber may not be a perfect venue, especially under one voice that can hopefully represent many, these are something that this is something that can improve, and the devs will listen to us as a whole. Don't worry about them individually listening to Brian or I, they're not. But as a big community, they will. And that's going to hopefully move the game in a better and better direction. But until then, and until other heated topics or our weekly news coverage, we'll see you next time.
Take care.